It does happen. Fratricide is a real issue. We just don't really like to think about it. So yes, so Penitence opens on the immediate aftermath of a 13-year-old girl having shot and killed her 14-year-old brother. Her parents, Angie and David, are, of course, distraught and angry and struggling to manage all of this blame and anger that they're feeling against a conflicting desire to protect their 13-year-old daughter, Nora, against a very overzealous prosecutor who wants to charge her as an adult and send her to prison for life, even though she's 13. And they eventually reach out to Martine, who is a small town lawyer and not really experienced enough to manage this kind of a case, this criminal defense case. And so she eventually pulls in her son, Julian, who has his own twisted history with Angie. And so the novel really focuses not necessarily on the crime, but on the impact on the family and how does this family can they get to forgiveness? So I actually started by doing a lot of research. Um, First, I researched fratricide in general, and I found, kind of as many fratricide cases, juvenile fratricide cases, as I could find. And I looked at, generally speaking, how old the kids were, what weapons they used, what the circumstances were, what sometimes happened afterwards to them. I did also some research on mental health, because that's such a, it's a pervasive problem among teenagers, even, 12 and 13-year-old young teens or preteens. So a lot of what I did started with research, and the research was upsetting. I found a lot of cases with really young kids. I made Nora 13 because if I went any younger than that, in some states she might not have been criminally responsible, but at the age of 13, in some states, like for example, New York and California, she would be required to be charged as an adult. And in Colorado, a 13-year-old, um, the prosecutor has the discretion to charge her as an adult. So, the state laws are different everywhere, but I chose her age because it's shockingly young, but still allowed me to explore the criminal justice system. But I also found that there were, 12 and 11, and I even found a case of a 10-year-old committing fratricide. Um, it was disturbing to do some of the research and sad. They were all really interesting, and I knew going in that I wanted to write from multiple points of view because I didn't really think that I could drive the reader to understand forgiveness unless the reader also had empathy and compassion for each of the characters. And in order to induce the empathy and compassion, I needed to tell the story from each of their points of view. And I had a lot of fun with all four of them. It was hard, and I wanted to make sure I got all of the complexities of it right. But I wanted really to keep my eye on the ball that I was focusing on, which was forgiveness. And I think in adolescence, I don't know how much forgiveness there was going to be at the end of that show. There's not a lot of hope at the end of it because it's all about teen boys and the pressures they're facing and incel culture, and there are so many other issues going on there that didn't really apply to Penitence. Mine, I really did want to keep the focus on forgiveness, and so I tried really hard to excuse me, to focus on the fact that forgiveness is really complicated for all human beings, and that very likely the parents would not necessarily have the same reaction to what had happened. And that actually gave me another way to explore forgiveness, because you had one parent who was more easily able to forgive, and one parent who really struggled with it. And I found that actually in my research. I mean, I found when a lot of parents I don't think really wanted to talk about it, but I found a couple of people who had posted blogs about their experiences. I didn't consult psychologists. I thought more about how complicated forgiveness has been for me personally, and yet how impactful it's been for me personally. And that was the whole reason I wrote this book to begin with. I wanted to write about forgiveness. Um, and I think I had a long period of my life where I was angry and not very forgiving. And after an experience that I had where I forgiveness was kind of given to me. I mean, it was a gift to me to be able to forgive another person. I sort of changed my whole attitude about how I dealt with that. And so I feel like personally I've been on both ends of that spectrum. Um, so I felt like it was easy for me to kind of dig into both of those. I initially really struggled with how to tell Nora's story from Nora's point of view because she's a 13-year-old child with mental illness. And there, it's not that I consulted psychologists, but I did a lot of reading on mental illness in juveniles. And it's interesting because I don't know that psychologists actually understand mental illness in children that are, 12 and 13 years old, as well as they understand it in older human beings. And so I eventually decided that maybe I shouldn't be telling it right, in a close third point of view for Nora. And so I backed off and I made her chapters more omniscient. And once I did that, I had a ton of fun, because I was able to do some things from an omniscient point of view that I wouldn't have been able to do um, that I would not have been able to do from a close third point of view. So, for example, a 13-year-old might not have noticed some of the biases in the, that are occurring in the juvenile detention center and some of the unfairness. And when I backed away and told it from the omniscient point of view, I was able to bring in more of the criminal justice issues that interested me.